Freedom is the single most important thing. It is what is. At the core of everything is freedom. And all I want for humanity is to realize the truth that we are right now, and we are eternally free. We are simply disempowering ourselves by giving authority over to others. And this goes back to the timeline. Freedom and self-sovereignty go hand in hand. And everybody remember what I'm going to say. The only way to win this game is not to play. They want you to choose. Pick a side. They want you to choose. And once you choose, they got you. Don't ever forget what I just said.
RJ Spina, welcome back. Third time repeating. My brother, welcome on Just Happen. I wanted to ask you to begin with, why are the teachings that are coming through you right now most important for the times that we're living in?
There's a directness. There's a simplicity, there's a tangibility, and there's an immediacy to these teachings. And that is what is most required at this moment in our evolution, for us to be able to evolve with the greatest efficacy, for us to be able to seamlessly move through the trials and tribulations that are happening upon this planet. The teachings are, as you said, they are timeless, they are powerful, they are simple, they are tangible, they are immediate, because the truth doesn't require your participation, lies do. And so they're the foundation, they're the bedrock of the understandings and the way that humanity is going to work with itself to move itself forward over the next several hundred years. It's everything is timed perfectly. Everything is timed perfectly. And those that avail themselves of these teachings would, it registers in a very, very profound and easy way, as strange as that sounds. It's simple to understand. It's simple to work with. And I think that's really the key. It's for everyone. And that's what's most important to me.
You opened up your latest book, Access Superconsciousness, with a powerful commandment that goes, "Awaken all sages, the fire of truth now rages." What was coming through when you are calling to awaken sages? Who are these sages that are being awakened to what truth right now?
The truth about ourselves, the truth about the nature of what is. And that command, that invocation, had to do with both incarnate and what we would call disincarnate beings. It's time. This is humanity's great awakening. I mean, it is literally happening right now. So that invocation is for those of us that are here right now, and for those of us that are here right now, but not necessarily embodied, but continue to do their work in terms of their efforts and their love of humanity.
Mm-hmm. Every time an individual makes a choice, they are siphoning into a completely different timeline in their life and in their future. You said that right now we're experiencing a battle over disparate timelines. What are those timelines that you've been witnessing in humanity through the choices that we've been making that we're essentially battling over right now?
Well, I mean, there's various timelines that are presenting themselves at this moment. But I would say what we really want to look at is self-sovereignty. Self-sovereignty. We want to start to work with ourselves in a way where we are not encouraged or dependent upon others to make decisions for us. And this really is all about self-sovereignty. And these timelines have to do with how much of our empowerment are we going to give away in order to become disempowered for the idea of safety and security? And so we're seeing these different timelines play out where some people can't wait to give up whatever personal freedoms that they have for the idea, the concept of being safe and secure. And then we're also seeing a timeline that we're moving into where it's going to be the opposite of that. We're going to start to realize that we are sovereign beings, and that the very idea of handing over our power, our free will to someone else to make decisions for us, that's very limited in terms of what we can experience of our own self-evolution if we're allowing someone else to tell us what to do and what not to do. And the people that we are so-called have a choice in picking, it's the illusion of choice. And that's really what this is about. They want you to make a choice. And that's really the key. Is the making of that choice. The idea, believe it or not, is not to make that choice. The only way to win this game is not to play. And when we start to return to self-sovereignty and realize we don't need anyone making rules, regulations in any way, shape, or form, that's when this timeline of self-sovereignty will take hold completely.
In your 20s, you were having I would say, rough time, being open and an open channel to these higher dimensions, higher frequency bands. And, it could be tougher. I can imagine even when you were 20, all these concepts were not as far out in the mainstream or as, in the local vocabulary as they are now. And there was a moment where you made the decision to take your life, that you were going to take your life. And I didn't know this about you until you opened up about it in the recent book. But I'd just like to dig a little bit deeper of who did you meet on that path that decided to take you away from that timeline of ending this physical incarnation?
Yeah. Well, there was a period in my early 20s that you're alluding to. I didn't have the best relationship with my dad growing up. It was violent. I was going through a period of from a human perspective, a lot of loss. I grew up in a 2-family house, so we lived upstairs, and my grandmother and grandfather and uncle lived down below. And there was a period of time where all of them left their bodies. I lost my best friend from high school. My sister's husband, who was quite young, he died in horrific circumstances. My best friend, which was my dog, passed away. And of course, the escalating violence in my own house. For me at that time, it just became too much to bear. And I decided that this incarnation just wasn't working out. Just wasn't happening. And I had decided that it was just time to end the incarnation. And as I talk about in the book, I met someone during that time, right at that time, actually. And I go into great detail about him, about certain things about him in the book. And he was integral in helping me wake up. There was stuff I won't necessarily ruin. It's worth it to read the book or get the Audible as I narrated. There were moments that I had with him that brought me out of that state of total despair. Total despair. And it came down to one night, literally one night. I had set my intention that I was going to end my life. And I had just spent time with him. And he's still to this day by far the best trance medium that this planet has seen for a very long time. And I don't even think people are ready to know who that individual really is. I'm not even going to talk about it right now. Maybe at some point I will. In this lifetime, he's preferred to work completely and utterly behind the scenes. Completely and utterly behind the scenes. But it was my interactions with him and his urging, his pleading with me to meditate, served as a massive catalyst in terms of me not ending this incarnation. And it was really that night when I went home, something had to happen one way or another. And, clearly I'm still here. So what happened was I came out the other end of it, but that's about as close as you get to ending your incarnation.
Yeah. He urged you, like, bro, you need to start meditating. And do you remember what that first meditation that you ever did in your life was like?
Yeah, it saved my life. Literally, it changed everything. I had always been leaving my body as a kid and doing all these things, but Emilio, it was never a focused or dedicated meditation, if that makes sense. It would just, as I've talked about before, it would just occur through my own relaxation. I would just leave my body and do these things, but I had never ever sat down to meditate, not even once. I was never taught any meditation. And when he was urging me, because he could tell how despondent I was, and I was just ready to give up. He was urging me to do it, and he offered to teach me meditation. And I was so hurt and so arrogant. I literally said to him, "Don't bother. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out myself." Right. And I really honestly, I just wanted him to stop. I just didn't want to hear it. I was in my own misery, deeply. And I didn't want to hear it. But when I went home to meditate that night, I all of a sudden, I just found, and I still teach that meditation to this day. I still teach that meditation. And it was a clear remembrance, because I went through this whole thing about it's true, proper meditation, what I did. And it just came back to me. I didn't have any kind of thought about it or read about it in a book or have anyone show me. And in that meditation, a screen, it was within 5 seconds, a screen dropped down, which is really my third eye opened, which, by the way, that wasn't the first time my third eye had been open, but it was the first time that I consciously did it out of a need. And that screen dropped down and my third eye opened. And in that moment, in about 10 seconds, 12 seconds, I saw myself, not as RJ. I saw myself, and I understood more about myself in those 10 or 12 seconds than I had in the previous 24 years combined. Everything all of a sudden made sense. The desire for me to end my life vanished that moment. The grief vanished in that moment. My own inner rage that I couldn't do anything to stop the loss of all my friends, that vanished. I was literally saved. I was literally saved through that meditation. And like I said, I understood myself in a way that I had never understood myself for, because I saw myself doing things and everything made sense to me at that moment. It's like, now I get it. Now I understand why I feel the way I do. Now I understand why I understand the things that I understand, and et cetera, et cetera. It might be the single most impactful moment that I've had as RJ in this incarnation.
You made a choice to change, and essentially that rippled out through the whole cosmos. And it was a clear choice to change, not just like, oh, tomorrow maybe I'll stop eating this sugar or whatever. It was like a clear choice. And when you said that you started realizing who you really were beyond RJ, was it that there were past incarnations of memories coming back to you where you're realizing that you were from a higher self that projected itself into this physical reality? What was that like, of remembering who you really are?
Yeah. Some of this I'm still going to keep to myself, but I will explain a little bit, because there's nothing more personal. So some of it I'm going to keep just for myself. But I saw myself in a completely different incarnation, and I was helping create what we call Atlantis. So there were a couple of beings, we could say, that were like myself. And when I say create, I don't mean putting bricks down to build something. what was actually going on was changing the energies of the environment, making the energies of the environment conducive to an advanced civilization to actually occur and thrive in that environment. So literally manipulating energies and changing things around. And there were 3 other beings that were doing that. I was one of them. And I saw myself doing this. And I had always felt as a kid, I had always felt as a kid that I'm a god, and we all are. But this was just in a different way. I always felt that I was an architect of civilizations. I always felt I was a creator of civilizations. And this was the tangible, direct experience and memory of literally doing it. And when I experienced that, I could let go of a lot of the character of RJ, and it allowed me to tangibly realize more of who I always felt I was, or what I am. It's not really a who, what I am, and it allowed me to proceed with that inner tangible knowingness that I am here to do this yet again, the same thing just in a different way, and its impact on my life. There's no words. And it's part of why I kind of almost start the book with this. It's one, it might not be the start of the book. It's one of the first things in the book. And it also just reminded me of what I'm here to do and what I'm capable of. And it freed me up to actually then proceed in that way.
How is the notion of the 12 Elohim related to, as you just mentioned, these architects of the universe and of the cosmos?
Well, we'd have to go to some of the Hindu masters talk about something that's called the absolute, or the all there is. The absolute, or the all there is, it is everything. And at a certain point, it became self-aware in a very limited way. So in other words, just imagine just waking up one day and then realizing that everything is you. Everything is actually you, but you just woke up. You don't know anything about yourself way down there or way up there or way over there, etc. You don't know anything about yourself. And your desire to know yourself, to know thyself and all thy infinite potential, which is the only real directive of existence itself, to know thyself. And so this absolute, or all there is, was desirous of understanding itself. And so in order to understand the depth of itself, it created versions, you could say, of itself. And think of them as drones, as an analogy for the 21st century. So it created a version, and it sent these drones out to explore itself over there, down there, over there, because it didn't know anything about itself. Now, those are the 12 gods. Now, I'm not the only one. It's rare, but I'm not the only one that has experienced these things. The Elohim are these 12 other gods, and their children, or their projections, are the ascended masters. And so they've had, the ascended masters are the true teachers of humanity. And some of these Elohim have played the role in the building of all the advanced civilizations that have ever been on this planet, and various systems of worlds, not just Earth. So the Elohim, these other gods, when they project pieces of themselves, these are what we call the ascended masters. And there's 13, what I call old school ascended masters. There's several dozen ascended masters that have gone through evolution. These ascended masters I'm talking about were created at that level, if that makes sense. They didn't become a master through evolution. They started off that way. And these Elohim are the ones that play the major roles in every advanced civilization. Lemuria, ancient Egypt, all of them. And not just this planet, but other planets as well.
And if the Elohim created these physical universes, what then, to your insight, created the Elohim?
The absolute, or the all there is what gave birth to these things. So we are still within all there is. But then you get one step removed, you then have the creation of the all there is, and this is the Elohim. And the Elohim, these other gods like our God, create environments for them to evolve, for them to learn about themselves. And the God that the environment that we're in is a multiverse that was created by one of those gods. And the ascended masters that keep showing up here are the children of the Elohim. And those ascended masters that keep showing up here are the ones that come here with this supreme knowledge, supreme wisdom, and they plant the seeds for these advanced civilizations, because they actually are the true teachers of humanity, and really the true teachers of consciousness itself. But just specifically, we're talking about humanity.
It got me thinking, because if there's 12 different Elohim that then go on to create their own universes or worlds, then that must mean that they all like to create in a different way, that they have some sort of differences in their tastes, in the qualities that they imbue into their creations. What are some of those differences between the 12 universes that were created, just from the one that we're experiencing now here in this physical dimension on Earth?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. The differences are that there's no words to describe actually how different it really is. This multiversal structure, multifrequential, multidimensional structure that was created by our God is completely and utterly unique. There's no other Elohim or God that created any environment that is anything like this whatsoever at all. What I can talk about specifically is the environment that I'm from, is this Elohim, or this God that I'm a projection of. And I used to draw pictures of it as a kid. I didn't know why I was drawing these pictures. It made sense once I got into my 20s, though. I go, now I realize why I just kept drawing that, because that's home. So we don't really have a frame of reference for these things, Emilio, so it becomes very, very difficult. But just think of 4 quadrants, and they operate independently but are constantly informing one another and learning from one another concurrently and in parallel. But there's these 4 separate quadrants. And the only way that I can describe it is it's a level of what we would call quantum mechanics that is so far beyond our intellect that these things are happening in each quadrant on so many different levels. And each quadrant is learning simultaneously from the 3 other quadrants, and they're informing one another as it's actually happening. And it's a level of consciousness and mechanics that there's no way that I can describe the level of evolution that is happening. But the only way I can describe it is that my consciousness works like that, which is why my consciousness is so odd, is that it's really working in a different way. Now, that environment doesn't have any low frequency as well. So those 4 quadrants are supremely high frequency. It created nothing like what our God, our God has created high frequencies and high dimensions as well. But this Elohim that I am part of didn't create an environment that's low frequency. So everything that's happening is in the supreme and exalted state. And therefore everything that this Elohim ever produces is of supremely high frequency. Now, the Elohim that also projected the being that we know as Thoth or Buddha, the environments are not the same, but that Elohim also didn't create anything of low frequency at all. So, and I find that quite telling if we look at the incarnations of Master R and we look at the incarnations of the being that we know as Buddha. Their consciousness is very reflective of this supremely high frequency and mastery of mind and things like this, because nothing the source that they came from never created anything low frequency. So everything is of this exalted state of consciousness. But each Elohim's environment is so wildly different. And there's really no words. It has to be experienced. There's no physicality. There's no physicality to some of these things. None. It's the moment that you have intention for anything. It's like literally like an entire, not civilization, but it's almost like an entire world is built in like a second. And until you, until you experience these things, I'm just going to struggle to try to find words. But where I come from is those 4 quadrants that operates on a level of quantum mechanics that the human mind can't comprehend.
And RJ, what can you tell us about the specific Elohim that created this earth plane? Because I feel that when we begin to understand what was the primary intention behind the creation of this physical universe, we can navigate as masters within it instead of as victims from it.
Well, I'm partial. I'm partial to our God and this environment because I do most of my work here when I incarnate. So our God, and I've said this before, but if we could really allow ourselves to feel the depth of the statement that the multiverse is a multi-frequential, multi-dimensional hall of mirrors designed for self-mastery. And from my perspective, it is the single greatest piece of imagination ever inspired into existence. Where this multiverse of this God, there's absolutely nothing like it. Everything is mirroring back our state of being and our state of consciousness perpetually for eternity. And it's perfectly designed to get endless feedback on what it is that we're creating, on what it is that we're emanating. And that's why I say it's literally a multi-frequential, multi-dimensional hall of mirrors designed for self-mastery, because it absolutely is. There is nothing like this multiverse anywhere. And this self-mastery designed for self, to know thyself and all thy infinite potential. I feel this creation is the ultimate in understanding that. And I feel that way about consciousness, about the whole thing is to know thyself and all thy infinite potential. So we're a perfect, match, because I'm just as obsessed with the evolution of consciousness as our God is. And it's like, it's past an obsession for me. I can't stop. I mean, it's like I've gotten out of the way a long time ago, and I am compelled and impelled, and I couldn't stop doing what I'm doing even right now. If I tried, I can't. And so I feel like it is the greatest thing ever invented for our own evolution, because everything is mirrored back to us. The universe, the multiverse, mirrors and amplifies whatever it is that we give notion to. We are in this perpetual state of learning about the self. And it is of it's a level of intelligence that is not comprehensible. And to me, it is the greatest creation ever imagined into existence for the evolution of consciousness itself.
In the book, you played around with this idea of contrasting play of words and concepts and notions. Like every chapter was from ignorance to wisdom, violence to kindness, resentment to forgiveness, weakness to strength. I think that's also part of the beauty of this physical dimension, is that we get to learn everything through differing degrees of contrast. And, when we learn about anger, we learn about compassion. When we learn about desire, we learn about stillness. So let's go a little bit deeper into that notion of the duality that we face, because a lot of people say like, oh, I don't want to be in duality. I want to be in oneness. But at the same time, it's the duality that's helping us evolve and learn and grow in our consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, we are where we are in this multiverse. We are exploring the minutia of this environment. And in order to explore that minutia, this is where we get the experience of duality: good, bad, right, wrong, violence to kindness, as you said, greed to generosity. And so these teachings allow us to understand how to go from one end to the other and pass right through. And that's why these are the same teachings I share with the other ascended masters. These are the exact same teachings. So to be able to move from greed to generosity will allow us to move through this experience, this so-called physical experience with grace. It'll allow us to move through this without having to repeat things over and over again, because I can tell you that the original idea of all of this, Emilio, was not to do this over and over again. That was not the idea. It was not to have 10,000 lifetimes, 20,000 lifetimes. That was never the idea. And it's because we weren't, from my perspective and God's perspective, we weren't working with ourselves properly and optimally. We were getting addicted. We were getting engrossed. We were getting attached. We were getting identified with the experience itself, because the low frequencies are so intoxicating. For the higher self that projects as a piece of itself, you or me, the low frequencies, it has no idea of what touch or any of these things are like, any sense of physicality. So it's intoxicating, addicting for the higher self that's projecting a soul or an aspect. And so these teachings will allow us to see the low frequency way of operating and the high frequency way of operating while still here in the low frequencies, which will allow us to move through this entire process and work properly and optimally with ourselves. But it's only by seeing, as you said, the duality of these things, but to then also, just to make it even more bizarre, to realize that there really is no such thing as duality, that it's still just one thing. It's still all just one thing. But our attention is over here, and then our attention is over here, and then it seems like two different things, but it's really one thing. But these teachings allow us to operate in a way that we can move through this experience with the greatest efficacy of consciousness, as well as the most joy and love in our heart, without getting caught here, without getting encumbered in karma, without creating so much cause and effect that we're going to have to then turn around and have this experience again, because everything that we're giving birth to is of low frequency. And so we have to be on the receiving end of that. For us to fully understand ourselves as a limitless creator, we have to be the recipient of what it is that we created as well. And that's really what cause and effect is. And really, part of the idea behind this book is for us to become a being of pure cause, sans any effect. And when we do that, we must operate out of unconditional love and timeless wisdom. And that's what these teachings are. They're born out of unconditional love and timeless wisdom. And that will remove us from the attachments and the identifications and the suffering that we have gotten used to in terms of how to evolve. We're at a point where we don't have to suffer to evolve. This is the point of going from greed to generosity, from violence to kindness, from disorder to order, for us to realize that we can evolve ourselves not through the suffering, but through the liberation of consciousness.
I would love to go a little bit deeper into that notion of the law of cause and effect, where you mentioned that someone who embodies their self-mastery only becomes the cause. What would that look like, in real terms of when we're putting out a cause but not receiving an effect in return?
When you are operating in the driver's seat of the miracle machine, at the core of existence is unconditional love. Everything is born of that that the wellspring of being and non-being is actually the vibration of unconditional love. And love is unconditional. So it's not a business transaction. You're not looking to get something in return. Now, when you operate from that state, now what surrounds, I'm trying to think of an image, but I'm not getting one. So if we think of if we think of an atom and everything that's circulating around the atom, I guess that's the image I'm getting. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So the very core is unconditional love. Now, what just circles it as close as you can get to that source point is timeless wisdom. The summation of all timeless wisdom is unconditional love. So if we operate from that, timeless wisdom and unconditional love, we're not looking to receive anything. You become a pure being of cause because you're operating at the highest level. And a master can't get karma. A master operates beyond the law of cause and effect. They can't sully themselves or dirty themselves. And this is what I want for everyone. I want everyone to be able to operate in this way.
So it almost seems counterproductive for us to develop first our wisdom before our unconditional love.
Okay. Now, when we say that, I have a feeling most people are going to interpret wisdom as intellectual knowledge or information. That, my friend, is bullshit. That's not
It's the ego
right.
mind.
That's not, listen, the ego mind identity is artificial intelligence. Let's get this straight. It's already happened. We're all AI. Your ego mind identity is artificial intelligence. It's already occurred. Okay. So now when we talk about wisdom, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about gnosis or knowledge of self, which is universal and not contextual. It always applies. Intellectualism or information is contextual, and it has to do with circumstances and events. That's not what I'm talking about. Now, the only way to really develop timeless wisdom is to be able to sit in such pristine silence and patience that the knowingness just starts to waft up and it informs your mind rather than your mind reaching out for things because it's disconnected from the source point. And this is why the ego mind is so ravenous for information. It's why people are on YouTube watching this channel or this, trying to get information about what's going to happen over and over again. That is 100% ego mind because it's disconnected from the source point of knowingness. So the source point of knowingness is how the wisdom develops. And so in order for us to actually experience this, we have to be, the analogy I use is the unshaken snow globe, right? Snow globe, you shake it, right? And then this happens. Well, you can't see anything. There's no clarity at all. So it's through this stillness. It's within the soil of patience that wisdom grows, the stillness, the silence. And that will inform the mind. We're doing it backwards. We're having the lower conscious leading and grasping for information because it's completely and utterly bankrupt and because it's disconnected from the source point. It's disconnected from what actually even gave birth to it. And so developing that kind of wisdom, I wouldn't say we necessarily have to put that ahead or before unconditional love, but I will say timeless wisdom is infused and imbued from unconditional love.
Is that source point of knowingness reside within our body? Would that be the heart?
Okay. No. So the heart is the meeting point of physical. Okay. How do I say that properly? Okay. When we are incarnate where we are now, right? Okay. The sentience, the I am, what we really are, resides between the heart and the spine. Okay. So the fourth chakra or the heart chakra is the meeting point, we could say, between being a spiritual being and having a physical experience. So right in that center point is right here. It's not the heart itself. The heart is representative. The heart is representative. It's not the actual physical heart, if that makes sense, right? Matter does not have dominion over spirit. Everything comes from spirit. But that's why the sentience sits right in the middle, because this is, or the I am, or the self with the capital S. This is so by meeting in the middle, we merge physicality with spirit, and that is truly what an awakened person is.
And coming down into these lower frequencies, it could even cloud some of those intuitive functionalities. Let's say the timeless wisdom, the knowingness, the gnosis. You talked about that there's a specific, a high frequency bubble called the Merkabah, which helps us operate with our intuitive functionalities while being in the lower frequencies. Just like Jesus said, be in the physical world, but not of it. So how does one tap in to this Merkabah or develop it even further for them to be able to access these states while in their physical body?
Detachment from body consciousness. So detachment from body consciousness. And the analogy we can use is if we think of a spaceship. Let's say it's some alien from somewhere, right? So these aliens that are not from here, and neither are we. We're not from here either. But these aliens that are visiting and using a spaceship, inside the spaceship is an environment that is conducive to them to operate how they normally do inside that spaceship, right? Okay. So that way they don't lose all their functionality. So when we incarnate into the lower frequencies and we immerse ourselves through complete identification with the body, we're reducing ourselves to the physical and we're not operating from that high frequency state of consciousness. So therefore we lose all of our knowingness. So it's through detaching from identification, and the identification with the body is the foundation of the ego-mind identity, which is what creates suffering. So by detaching from the identification with the physical form, what naturally happens is our frequency starts to rise. And if we just see this for what it actually is, which is just energy, this higher frequency state will start to realize that we do have, I'll use the word bubble around us. We actually have this. It used to be much larger when we were in a higher frequency, by the way. It used to be this much, much larger thing. And it was actually quite visible for those that were a little more advanced in opera. You could actually see it. You could actually see this in people. We've lost that.
In Atlantis?
Yeah, Atlantis, Lemuria, ancient Egypt, to name a few. So we used to be able to visually see this. Now that, because of the immersion into the lower frequencies and identification with this, that's been lost. So by no longer identifying with the vehicle, when we get in our car, we don't think we are our car, right? I'll try to keep it as simple as possible, right? But for some reason, because it's so intoxicating here, when we slide into this body, we actually think this is what we are. And we're not. We're the awareness of this vehicle. We get to use it, and we're the total awareness. Now, if you can tangibly realize that, this higher frequency of the self will actually start to become tangible. And this what I call it a Vimana, for those who want to look that up. This Vimana or Merkabah actually starts to emanate. Literally. And this is how we're able to move through this frequency without being affected by everything. When you identify with your body, you're going to be affected by everything that goes on here. When you don't identify with your body, you'll be less affected by everything that goes on here because you will actually be creating this higher frequency bubble. And all supremely advanced beings, ascended masters and other beings, all supremely advanced beings, they actually create a Vimana or a Merkabah, a Vimana around themselves of just pure energetics, even when they're here. So there's no spaceship around you or me, but a supremely high frequency being actually creates one. And through that, it allows them to operate with their normal level of functionality, their higher consciousness level of functionality, because they're encapsulated in this Vimana or spaceship or bubble, but it's made out of pure energy. And we can all do it, but it starts with the detachment from the identification with the body. The body is part of the local environment. It's attuned to and part of the local environment, which is extremely low frequency. So we can't operate in a high frequency way. We can't do this if we identify with the body. And that's why the detachment from the identification, which is the foundation of the false character of the ego-mind identity, is essential for us to start operating optimally and properly.
How would you begin to describe this functionality that we're talking about that these ascended masters would create for themselves? I know we've heard stories of ancient gurus and people like Yeshua, Mary Magdalene performing miracles. But what are some of those intuitive functionalities that they behave with and act with while they're in this physical reality that, as we begin to start mastering ourselves, we'll begin to unlock as well?
Well, one giveaway is just this immense wisdom and love that they have. Because they're fully attuned. They have detached from local low frequency phenomena, and they're fully attuned to themselves and their higher mind. So they would just emanate boundless wisdom. And the frequency of love that comes from them is palpable. So that's the first thing that we would notice about them. They would be able to access things that you just can't. You just can't look it up. They're just already connected to it. Some of these traits or characteristics that you're talking about, when we move into like the fourth and fifth frequency, more of our astral body and therefore our astral abilities will come back online. And that's like clairsentience, the clairs. Teleportation, telekinesis, things like that. So a master often has all of those abilities. Some of them they turn off to not draw too much attention to themselves or become a target, shall we say. And most of them keep the more subtle abilities online. Clairsentience, clairvoyant, maybe the ability to heal, astral project, things like that. And teleportation, actually, probably okay. But those are the type of abilities, the clairs. But the dead giveaway, Emilio, is just the immense wisdom, and the love is the giveaway that this is a supremely advanced being that's working optimally, and we're all capable of doing that. But you can't do that with the finite mind. That is impossible. We have to let go of identification with this, and then all of these natural talents and abilities will start to come online.
I'm feeling into another phenomenon that is taking us away from operating with these higher functionalities. And you talked about it a little bit in the book, in chapter 5, Ignorance to Wisdom, which is, I also agree with you, there's almost this epidemic of what you would call Luciferianism, of people that are indulging in all things low frequency. You even call them non-human intelligences. So how can we begin to start becoming aware of this energy in order to stay away from it in a way, or acknowledge it, know that it's there, but at the same time continue our path of self-mastery and not attachment to the lower frequency?
If it doesn't make you feel lighter and freer, stay away from it. Lighter and freer. That's why you've often heard me say the truth doesn't require your participation, lies do. Now really look at that statement as in context to your question. This participation in all these things, these identification with all these things, attachments to all these things, having to operate a certain way, right? If it doesn't make you feel lighter and freer, stay away from it. That's the best way to know. And this planet, the agenda is, these are part of the timelines. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the subjugation of consciousness through identification. Identifying with the body, identifying with a role, identification with the concept, with the belief, identification with so-called knowledge, identification with scientism. And the spiritual community has got a big problem. The so-called spiritual community has got a big problem with this. I don't even use the word spiritual teacher in regards to myself, because spirituality has been hijacked. I speak only in metaphysics, because metaphysics is tangible and it is the higher truth. Spirituality has been co-opted through Luciferianism. This whole idea of everything is love and light, everything is namaste. That just makes you susceptible to being misled. And it also cuts you off from your own power. It also cuts you off from your own ability to overcome what needs to be overcome, to be able to recognize what you should not align yourself with. But if everything is love, light, and namaste, then we're going to miss this whole thing. So it is a true master is filled with compassion and has the energy of a warrior. Let that land. That's what they're really like. Endless wisdom, unconditional love, and they are ferocious. Fierce. Now take a look at the spiritual community. Do you really see that anywhere? That's what I mean.
I guess a question that arises from what you just spoke into is, why would consciousness choose to experience subjugation in the first place?
Because it's available. Because it's a possibility. We are immortal and eternal. We're going to avail ourselves of everything. Why? Because it's how we learn about ourselves. Because it's possible. Because it's available. And that's kind of what we're seeing. All the different choices that the souls on earth are making, we're seeing the totality of possible possibilities through the incredible variance that the choices that people are making, because they're available. That's the reason. There's no other reason. Because it's available. Now, we've reached a point in our evolution, Emilio, that we don't have to keep choosing what I would call, or probably what you would call, low frequency choices in order to evolve ourselves. We don't have to only evolve through suffering. Those days are over. We've done it enough. I'm not interested in that. And I know, like you and many of the people that are going to be watching this, they're not interested in that. They want to evolve in the way that we're talking about, from violence to kindness, from greed to generosity, from disorder to order, as the book lays out, the tenets of self-mastery, because we're able to do this now. But the reason why people choose it, Emilio, because they can, because it's available, and because everything is just an experience. So it's just an experience. And therefore we avail ourselves of all possible possibilities, all possible experiences.
Many people might say in that context, I want to move away from hate into love, as if it's different frequency or a different band in that spectrum. And you disagree with that. Hate is not the opposite end of love. What is on the opposite end of that spectrum?
Judgment. Hate is closer. For us to hate ourselves or someone else, there actually has to be a foundation of love already there to actually have that intensity of emotion. So I know we like to say the opposite of love is hate. No, it isn't. That has not been explored deeply metaphysically through total detachment. That's just not the case. Just like when we say caring and compassion are the same thing. They don't even have anything to do with each other. Or pain and suffering are the same thing. They have nothing to do with each other. We are not realizing we're saying these things because we don't have a level of detachment and therefore clarity in terms of what we're really talking about. Judgment. Love is unconditional. What's the opposite of conditional? Judgment. The opposite of love is not hate. It's judgment.
What is the greatest teaching that Kuan Yin, the Ascended Master, left behind for you?
Yeah. So, Emilio, at a certain, I'll speak for myself. I have such a deep relationship and connection with these beings that as soon as I think of them, they show up. And quite frankly, it's overwhelming. And so sometimes someone may ask me a question about Kuan Yin or about Master Sananda. As soon as I think and feel them, they are literally right here. Literally. And it becomes emotionally, completely and utterly overwhelming. So when you ask me what is the greatest teaching, mercy is the greatest teaching. She is the God and Goddess of mercy.
Just in that energy, I could feel her energy as well. And I'm really curious to know how this current experience that you're living on the earth plane has made your heart more tender in the process.
Well, I would say through the tangible experience of my own destruction. It allows me to recognize that once again within myself when my body became, totally destroyed, ravaged with disease, sepsis, beyond sick, knocking on death about as close as you can get. And having that experience, that reminder of just how fragile our physical existence actually is, not our immortal existence. That's untouched. But the physical experience, that was the greatest reminder I could have given myself. And it reminded me of what it's like to have those sensations, to be that vulnerable, to be that sick, to be that incapacitated, to not be able to take care of yourself in any way, allows me to have that direct empathy with anyone who's in a dire situation, because I tangibly know what it's like to have a level of pain that your mind's going to snap, to have no hope, to have no functionality, to have no physical quality of life. It was the greatest reminder of that these experiences are possible, and souls are choosing to avail themselves of those. And it allows me to be fully present for them, to be completely compassionate towards them, which is why I supercharge self-healing and doing workshops on healing. And I know what it's like. I mean, I know what it's like. And so, and until we're faced with some kind of challenge like that, it changes everything. It absolutely changes everything. And thank God I gave myself that experience so I could remember what it's like to be at that point, and then to be the embodiment of what it takes to go from that all the way to over here and provide the protocols and teachings and understandings that anyone who's all the way over here can get all the way over here.
If you were to have gone through what you went through in 2016 all over again, would you have done anything differently?
Well, I used to joke about this with the Chinese medicine expert who wrote the foreword for the first book. I don't want to find this out. Okay. But if all that was that, I don't. So let me make that clear. I already did it in this life. That's enough. Okay.
We won't speak it into existence.
Yeah. So, but I would say I really mean this. I went from, essentially death and a destroyed body to function to, fine in 100 days. I think the only part of that challenge that I think I would do different is that because of what I remembered and then learned through going through that process, as ridiculous as it sounds, I could do it much faster. If it happened again, I could do it much, much faster because there were, okay, let me say this. The first 17 days that I was in the hospital rehab, nothing was happening. Nothing. It wasn't a thumbs up, my friend. It was like, wow, I can't get anything going here. Nothing's really physically. Nothing's really happening here. I can't feel a thing, and nothing works, and blah blah. Right. So, and on day 17, and that video captures when I start moving my leg and then moving my toe. Okay, so I made some adjustments, and the next day, that's when that started to happen. So, being obsessed with the evolution of consciousness, if it happened again, I wouldn't, quote unquote, waste the first 16 days. I would get right to the stuff that immediately started bringing life into my diseased and paralyzed body. Now, that being said, I didn't waste those 16 days because I learned that full incorporation of certain things had to be done simultaneously for the efficacy to be enhanced by an order of magnitude. And I wasn't doing it properly the first 16 days. But as soon as I started doing it properly, as you could see, my legs started kicking, my foot started kicking. So I guess the answer would be, if knock on wood, if that would ever happen again in this lifetime, I would aspire to do it faster.
Was it because in those 16 days you were riddled with a lot of doubt that you could heal, or was it a completely different thing?
No, I had zero doubt. I never had a thought that I wouldn't do it. And I really mean it. Not even one. Not one. The mastery of the mind had taken place. And soon the body follows the mind. So I knew the body would follow the mind. So I knew that was going to happen. I never had a doubt. What I did have was a lot of drugs that was sapping me of me having complete and utter control over my energy and raising the frequency of my entire body, because those drugs were deadening and lowering my frequency. It's kind of like trying to work with mud as an analogy, like trying to build something using mud. Good luck, right? So getting off all the drugs, and also this incorporation. There's you would think I would remember. I think it's step 4. I should know that, right? But anyway, I think it's step 4 of the healing technique, which is activate your full healing intention, right? Which is where we incorporate the 4 rudimentary expressions that a human being has: visualization, verbal, sensation, and physicality, right? So once I started putting those things together as one thing, that really did supercharge the effect. And I hadn't really married those things. I was almost doing them separately. And that had far less efficacy in terms of my healing intention. So that, and also, like I said, the drugs, you can't heal with drugs. You can't. If you take antibiotics and drugs only suppress the illness. They push it deeper down into the tissues. They lower your frequency, and then you have to heal twice. One from the original thing, and then you have to heal the second time from the drugs that you're taking.
I have it down here as step number 3, activate your healing intention. The 4th, going into command creator consciousness, which is the realm of the gods. What was that jump like from knowing that you had the intention to heal to becoming that creator, becoming that God that put your body back together?
It wasn't even really a jump, Emilio. It was more about the application. It was more about putting it into place, like actually doing it. I already knew it, but I wasn't doing it. And when we're in the lower frequencies of the physical universe, the doingness matters. The doingness absolutely matters. So the knowingness was there. That frequency and vibration, I don't mean knowingness, mentalization, that's worthless. We're not our thoughts, so it doesn't mean anything. But the knowingness was already there, but putting it into place, actually doing it, is where it was the leap, if that makes sense. Because some of those things I was literally explaining to the ICU nurse. When I first woke up, I said, I'm going to heal myself in 100 days. I mean, I told her the whole thing, and I literally started explaining some of the technique in detail to her right there. And she's like, how do you know this? How do you know this? And I just said, I remember. So it was the doingness, Emilio, not mentally knowing. Once I was actually doing it, I was getting the tangible effect from it.
When is a rose not a rose?
When one fails to recognize one as such. That question, that question changed my life, as you found in that book. Yeah, that question changed my life. That question almost literally just woke me up when I was asked that question. Yeah.
Let's break it down. When it fails to recognize one as such, what do you mean by that?
The I am, what we really are. We have convinced ourselves that we're this meat suit, and that we're our thoughts, our emotions, our bodily sensations, and the experiences that the body has. No, we're not. Not even close. So we don't know or recognize who and what we really are. And then therefore we can't live, act, love, or achieve in accordance with who and what we really are. Because we're not recognizing who and what we really are. We are the immeasurable I am in full stature now. And when that is recognized, there are no limitations. So when is a rose not a rose? When we fail to recognize one as such, when we don't really know who and what we are, and therefore we don't know what we're actually capable of doing. And that's the key, to know, not mentally, to tangibly know.
And the rosebud also has thorns on it, and that exemplifies what you mentioned about being a fierce warrior, as well as exemplifying all of this unconditional love and timeless wisdom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to, when you know yourself, you know that you're truly invincible and you can overcome anything. We give ourselves challenges to see ourselves in the act of overcoming them, not to acquiesce them, to capitulate to them. We give ourselves challenges to force ourselves to go in and access more of what we really are. That's what the challenge is for. We are demanding more from ourselves, and that is evolution itself. And when we do that, we actually leave here with a more tender heart and a stronger back. And that's what evolution is.
curious question I had for you is, you said that the prayer at dawn by Paramahansa Yogananda is the most powerful and transcendent prayer that you have ever heard. I've been searching for it all over the internet, and I found multiple variations of it. I'm not sure what about that prayer for you was so powerful, hearing it and repeating it.
Master Yogananda he is direct absolute, or all there is. He is not one of the 12 Elohim. He is the 13th old school OG ascended master. He is direct from the primal nature of existence itself. And the power that Paramahansa Yogananda has is unlike anything. And when I hear his voice completely in tune with what he actually is, it is the most beautiful, overwhelming, transformative sound I've ever heard, as he is literally pouring out his heart as he says that prayer. I have yet to really listen to that prayer at any time and not just start weeping. And I mean not once. I can feel his power. And I have such a deep connection with that being. Prayer at dawn is the greatest thing I've ever heard. That's not even close.
I would love to get a link to that and put it in the show notes for people to have their own experience with it. Specifically the one that you're referring to, because I've found multiple variations of it. But that would be beautiful just to get to know. And prayer for me has become sort of a daily practice. There's something about it that it's not like I'm pleading to the universe, like, come and help me, come and do these things for me. It's like you're in that oneness with the Great Spirit and allowing it to use you as a channel, allowing it to live in a way and breathe through you. Do you have a daily prayer that you use that's your own?
Okay, first thing I want to say is that is the original intention of how prayer is meant to be used, the way that you're using it. That's exactly right, my friend. Okay, how it's essentially taught, and I went to Catholic school until 6th grade. How prayer is used now, it's separation and hierarchy. Okay, so we're praying to God or a saint or whatever. We're praying to something outside of ourselves and that is beyond us, right? So that creates separation and hierarchy, which weakens prayer. We've turned prayer into something that lacks all efficacy because it's completely and utterly untrue. There is no separation and hierarchy. God is within your consciousness. So if we're setting up a situation or a paradigm that there's something outside of us and beyond us that has to do something to help us because they're outside of us and because we're weak, the whole thing is false. The whole thing is false. And that's probably why that's the way it's been taught here for a while, most likely. Now you, because you're so wise, you pray the way it was meant to be done. It's a unification. It's a communication. It's a oneness. It's a oneness. And that's when you speak with God, the oneness. That's exactly right. That's where the power comes from. Now, and the truth. Now, did you ask me if I have a prayer? What did you ask me?
Yeah. Do you have any daily prayer that you speak into existence every day?
I mean, there's only two. I wouldn't even say that I say it every day. It sometimes will come to mind, and it came to mind before we started the show. Right? And I said it. May every notion I give birth to bring about the victory of the light, and so it shall be.
Wait, let's say it again. Let's say it again. So it lands.
Yes. May every notion I give birth to bring about the victory of the light, and so it shall be. Now that just comes out sometimes. Now, dare I say, I live my life this way. So I'm not necessarily taking time out to say it because I feel that I live it, if that makes sense. But that definitely comes to mind. And the only other one that I have said every now and then is, "Speak, Father, your servant hears." Which is actually that's a very old past life thing. St. Alban is an incarnation of Master Ara. That's something St. Alban used to say all the time. I found myself saying it sometimes. "Speak, Father, your servant hears." So those two things come to mind.
When you ask the Father to speak, do you hear specific instructions?
I mean, it depends. It depends. It can be. How I tend to work with myself in general, is this deep inner knowingness that doesn't require asking anything. If that makes sense. That may sound weird, but it's just this deep inner knowingness. And really the goal, at least for RJ, whoever the hell RJ is, this goal is to know thyself so deeply, because the self is knowingness. The self is the timeless wisdom and unconditional love. So to be able to go so far deep within myself into the knowingness that that's all that comes out is this timeless wisdom and unconditional love. It's not so much, let me quote unquote ask a question of God. Now, that being said, getting way ahead of myself, because the third book is about to come out. The fourth book has direct communication with God in the fourth book. So there are times that I was speaking with God to get clarification on certain things. And that's actually going to be the fourth book. And let me just add to that too. These books are written completely out of order. Written, not released, written. So I wrote these books not the way that they're coming out. If that makes sense. So the first book I wrote was Supercharged Self-Healing. The next book I wrote is the fourth book. And we're not even at the third book in terms of release. So I wrote the first book, then I wrote the fourth book. Then I wrote the third book, and then I wrote the second book. So it's not in, and I know the way the world is receiving them is completely different, but that's not how they were manifested into reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, even I see this in the podcast episodes that we do, is that, I'll record and it's not necessarily the order that I record them in that I release them in. It's sometimes, and I've never said this on the podcast, but I decide which episode I'm going to release the day before the release date. Sometimes I plan it if we're like working with like a publisher, or, if we agree on a date with the guest. But most of the times it's like I'll sit in silence, and then I'll just perceive like, oh, it's this one next. And then I'll edit it, and then I'll release it the next day. And it's more about that like notion of, I feel like it's when the timing is right for the timeline of humanity. So what do you feel about this fourth book of your conversations with God that wasn't ready to be released 2 years ago, or when the second book was released?
Okay. So this doesn't matter. Okay. This is just, so my favorite book thus far that I've written is book 4. My next favorite book, and again, my favorite, what difference does that make? My next favorite is the book that's about to come out. I mean, when you and I are recording this, the book that comes out August 8th, right? Which is Access Superconscious. That's my next favorite. My next favorite is Supercharged. And then I would say last is Change Your Mind. And change them, and they're all needed. So they're coming out. If I would have come out with Supercharged and then book 4, it's too big a leap. It's too big a leap. I'll give a little bit of information about book 4. Direct communications with God. Spells from Merlin. New work from Shakespeare. New teachings from Saint Germain. So, and these are all aspects of Master R, right? So if I would have went from Supercharged to that, people would have been like, huh?
Bro.
Yeah, what? Huh? Right? So the way that they're coming out is perfect. The way that they're coming out, Change Your Mind has impacted people on such a deep level and literally removed the limitations. It was the perfect sequel, actually, to Supercharged. And the next perfect book to come out is Self Mastery, because as you were saying before, it ties together some of the stuff that I talked about in Supercharged and Change Your Mind, but takes it to this next level. Perfect. Book 4, all bets are off. We're dealing directly with God, directly with Merlin. And I even, obviously I wrote it, but I even say, and here's Shakespeare, here's Saint Germain, and here's Merlin, and let's hear from God. Right. So, it's right there. And by the time we get to that 4th book, people are ready to work with those teachings because of the teachings of the first 3 books and gaining some kind of familiarity with me and how I work. So it comes out perfectly, but they weren't written in that order at all, but they're being released in that way, but they're being released exactly how they need to be.
Yeah. And in that process of the 4th book, would you say it's similar to what people now know or call channeling? Was it like a channeled sort of writing, or would you frame it in a different way?
I would frame it in a different way. To me, it's more of a unification with that aspect of myself. So, there's no such thing as channeling. It's all one thing. So who are we channeling? Right? If we really looked at channeling, there's no such thing, because these are all aspects. These are all, how can I say that? These are all parallel versions of different aspects of the same self. Does that make sense when I say it that way? Mm-hmm. So it's all God. So we're not channeling anything or anyone, because the whole thing is God. But for me, the experience is more directly tapping into that other aspect of myself and the unification. So it's just, that sounds ridiculous, but there's not much difference between them talking and me. It kind of sounds very similar, except it's just some of the language is a little different, but the level of consciousness is exactly the same. So Plato it sounds exactly the same. That's just how I used to say it then and how I'm saying it now. So for me, it felt more like a merging of more of who and what I really am. And I wanted to, I wanted to tangibly experience those other aspects of myself. And so to do that, I felt it was best if I incorporated them into a book and give them credit for the parts that they say, instead of just saying the whole thing as RJ, which I could have, but it didn't feel right. I wanted to tap into more of me, and then therefore actually say, this is now from Saint Germain. This is now from Shakespeare. This is now. So it just worked out. The God thing did start out a little different, because I remember, and I was in Kauai at the time. So I wrote Supercharged Self-Healing in Kauai, and then I immediately wrote book 4, by the way. So that's how that worked out. So I remember having this experience about movement, and that I was in a state where I wasn't experiencing movement. The book will do a much better job of explaining. But anyway, I was having the knowingness that movement is a total illusion. The only thing that's actually happening is a shift of inner perception. And that shift of inner perception is actually projected outward in what we call movement. But there actually isn't any actual movement. It's perception. Perception is changing. Okay. So this is what I was experiencing. And I was like, is that right? There's no such thing as movement? That everything is literally just almost like turning the dial of our own inner perception. It gets projected outwardly. Because this is what I was feeling and experiencing. So I said, God, is this right? And that's where that came from. And then I decided to ask God something like confer with God like 4 other times. I forget how many times, 3 or 4 other times. But it was on these things that I was experiencing that I wanted, not verification, but when things are so far beyond what you can have any frame of reference for, it's like, well, I might as well just ask God.
Yeah. You wanted
You know
to
what I
record a podcast with God. That's it.
Yeah. So that's where that came from. But the Merlin and the Shakespeare and Saint Germain, that was more, I wanted to bring more of me into this book. And that book is a lot of fun. I mean, new spells from Merlin.
RJ, you already got me excited and us excited about book 4, but tell us about book 3 that is going to be coming out. This will be out right just a few days before the launch date. So let us know about Access Superconsciousness and where people can go find it.
Yeah. So it comes out August 8th, as you just said, Emilio. And I narrated it as well. So I think it's very impactful to hear me say it as you read it. So get the audible as well. The wisdom is contained within the tenor of my voice. So that book are the teachings of self-mastery. There's 24, as you know, 24 timeless teachings that are not, they're very rarely accessed. Very rarely access the depth of the teachings. Now, to me, what's most important is not that. What's most important is that each one of these 24 teachings, there's an accompanying meditation. So the reader or the participant can have the experience themselves. And that's why for me, everything is about being prescriptive. So there are 24 otherworldly timeless teachings and then a meditation, 24 meditations that goes with it. So we can all have that tangible experience, the tangible knowingness. And as I said earlier, these are literally the teachings I share with the other Ascended Masters, is the teachings that's in this book. The other thing that the book has, I talk about the Ascended Masters, quite specific about the Ascended Masters, probably in ways that humanity hasn't had that kind of level of specification before. So it's an honor to be able to share about the Ascended Masters and be able to be quite specific about them, their incarnations, where they come from, and often, who they do a lot of work with, right? So that's in there. And the very first chapter, as you mentioned, is complete. I mean, the whole thing is highly personal and autobiographical, but the first chapter literally is kind of like, you could see it as like a first chapter to an eventual book that will be an autobiography. So the first chapter is completely and utterly autobiographical. So I think I picked 4. I think there were 4 instances. Maybe there were 5, but I think I picked 4 instances that were monumental. They were monumental in my journey of self-realization or enlightenment. Each one of these things built upon the next experience. And I wanted to share these things that have changed me, because I think actually reading them will also change the reader. And that these things are actually occurring. Like, these things are actually happening. They're happening right now. It's not some, he used to be incarnated. No, these things are happening right now. And I wanted to share those monumental moments with people, and to illustrate that by immersing myself in that type of life, it fostered and led me into the ability to become self-realized, because the life that I was leading, even as a kid, and then definitively as a young adult after being suicidal, the life I was leading was so far outside of normal, and I was living it daily. And I want people to listen to what I'm saying, that sometimes that's actually how we have to live. It didn't mean I didn't participate in everyday life, because I did. But what I was doing every day was so far outside of the prescribed way in which we're supposed to live or allowed to live. And by allowing myself to create a reality and a life for myself that was so far outside the lines, that helped pave the way to my eventual liberation.
And I've noticed that when an individual gets vulnerable and real, it creates a magnetic ripple throughout consciousness, and you become a permission slip for other people. And I might assume that many people will resonate with your story, specifically the one of almost taking your own life. And I want to speak a lot of love into that and the way that you framed it, the way that you told that story, which is not easy to tell. So just in deep gratitude and appreciation for that first part of the book. And then the rest is just full of potent, powerful wisdom teachings beyond the ages that I really recommend people to go and immerse themselves into. And I was lucky enough to get the chance to go through the book before it was released. And I already know I'm pushing it with all my high frequency energy to reach as many people as possible. And as you know, we end every show with the segment called The Final Trio, which are just rapid fire questions that we always get into, pretty deep, pretty esoteric, but we do our best. The first one that I have for you is, what is the most potent realization about the universe that you have awakened to and know rather than just believe?
Freedom. That everything and everyone is free. Our only bondage is not realizing it. And that is the truth. That is what is. That is the nature of what is. And that knowing that you are totally free on the deepest levels actually will be the catalyst and the accelerant for your own liberation.
Powerful. If you could tune in to Master R's highest desire for humanity, what would that be?
Well, coming back to that word, freedom. Freedom. That's it. Nothing else matters. Let me be really, really clear about that. Nothing else matters. Freedom. That's it. That's not second. That's not third. That's not after security or after this or after being part of a group or after some identification or after playing some role or after memorizing some useless information. Freedom is the single most important thing. It is what is. At the core of everything is freedom. And all I want for humanity is to realize the truth that we are right now, and we are eternally free. We are simply disempowering ourselves by giving authority over to others. And this goes back to the timeline that we talked about. Freedom and self-sovereignty go hand in hand. Freedom and self-sovereignty go hand in hand. And everybody remember what I'm going to say. The only way to win this game is not to play. They want you to choose. Pick a side. They want you to choose. And once you choose, they got you. Don't ever forget what I just said.
Thank you for that, brother. I needed to hear that, and I'm sure a lot of people did as well. The last time we were here a few months ago, I asked you a question that opened up both of our hearts immensely and very powerfully. And that was that I asked you, what does your heart say when you tune into your fondness and love for humanity? And your response was that I can't do enough. I wanted to ask you, just to end this conversation, what do you feel it would take for you to know that you have done enough?
You're determined to make me cry. I think that's what this is.
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
All right. When I can look back or look upon humanity, and we are working with ourselves in the way that all these teachings and all my ramblings, and other beings as well, all these teachings and all these ramblings, when we are the embodiment of these, when we're putting them into practice, when we are operating properly and optimally, when we are living through our own wisdom and unconditional love, that we are no longer evolving through suffering. When I can look back at that point, I'll feel I've done enough.
I feel that we are headed down that path.
Absolutely.
And it's an honor always to serve alongside you, to allow your message even more wings to fly and reach the people that need it. And also to, by us co-creating and coming together, we're also attracting those sages that are also here to usher in the new earth and that new frequency for humanity. And I'm just beyond honored and grateful to get this opportunity with you, brother, for you for sharing so abundantly. And, you know, I'm always here as a brother, as a support system to your cause and what you're co-creating with humanity. So I appreciate you so much.
Well, the honor is mine. The honor is mine. Thank you, Emilio.
Thank you.